So our first example, 3.1.1, we have in 2010, the Pew Research Center questioned 1,500 adults in the U.S. to estimate the proportion of the population favoring marijuana use for medical purposes. It was found that 73% are in favor of using marijuana for medical purposes. State the individual, variable, population, sample, parameter, and statistic. So here what we're going to do is literally parse through this paragraph and identify in context the individual, variable, population, sample, parameter, and statistic. These are the definitions we described in the previous material. So here the individual is simply going to be a U.S. adult. So 1,500 adults in the U.S. So an individual would be, well, a single U.S. adult. So a U.S. adult. So the variable, so the who is the individual, a U.S. adult. The variable is the what. So what data, what information are we extracting from an individual here? So they really want to know if the person is in favor of marijuana use for medicinal purposes. So here the variable is going to be literally the response to the question, are you in favor of marijuana for medical purposes? Okay, so the who is the U.S. adult, that's individual. The variable is the what. It's going to be the response to the question, are you in favor of medical marijuana for marijuana for medical purposes? Notice that the reply or answer to this question is going to be a yes, a no. So it's definitely a name or label. And so here we know that this is going to be qualitative data. So we can go ahead and since the answer is a yes, no reply, we have qualitative variable. Probably should put a noun marker. We have a qualitative variable here. All right, so the individual is the who, a U.S. adult. The variable is the response to the question, are you in favor of marijuana for medical purposes? And we've identified that that variable is a qualitative variable. Next, what is the population? Meaning, what is the actual overall group of individuals that we're actually interested? So the population is going to be the set of all U.S. adults. Okay, we had 1,500 in our sample, but the population is all U.S. adults. Okay, and as I mentioned before, the population is really the target or the whole group of individuals that we want to study. Of course, we don't have time or the money to interview every single U.S. adult. And so in this particular example, the Pew Research Center questions 1,500 U.S. adults. So the sample is a set of 1,500 U.S. adults. Okay. So I guess I could be that are questioned, be really leave no room for error. It's not these 1,500 people over here that we didn't ask the question. It's the sample is the set of 1,500 U.S. adults that were questioned. Okay. So the parameter, now we have to go back in and look at here. The parameter is really, we're interested in the proportion. you can think of proportion as the percent of the population favoring marijuana or the proportion of the population favoring marijuana. So here the parameter is going to be the proportion or percent of all. Notice I've got it's a property, numerical trait of the population, and the population is all the individuals that were interested. So I've got the word all there. The proportion or percent of all U.S. adults favoring marijuana for medical purposes. Okay, so that's fixed, and that's what we'd like to know, but we don't actually can't get to that unless we interviewed every single adult in the U.S. So the statistic, that's going to be what we actually collect data from, and that's going to be the number from our sample that we're going to estimate the parameter. So the statistic is the proportion, and I got to spell that right, or percent of the 1,500 U.S. adults surveyed that are in favor of marijuana for medical purposes. Now, in this particular study, we in fact have that actual statistic. The statistic is, well, 73% of the 1,500 U.S. adults favor marijuana for medical purpose. All right, to clean this up so you can see it now. In recap, for this particular example, the individual is a U.S. adult. The variable is the response to a question, are you in favor of marijuana for medical purposes? Since we know the answer is a yes/no reply, we determine that this is a qualitative variable. The population is a set of all U.S. adults. The sample is the set of 1,500 U.S. adults that were questioned. The parameter is the percent of all U.S. adults favoring marijuana for medical purposes. The statistic is the percent of the 1,500 U.S. adults surveyed that are in favor of marijuana for medical purposes. In this particular study in 2010, that statistic is 73% of the 1,500 U.S. adults favor marijuana for medical purposes. All right, let's move on to the next example.